Pacific region. He has also held advisory roles across multiple sectors, ranging from governmental organizations to supporting organizations and the private sector. He's worked extensively with the Asia-Pacific Internet community and has held several leadership roles, including the founding chair of ICANN, Asia-Pacific Regional at-Large Organization, and chair of the Pacific Islands chapter of the Internet Society. He's worked extensively on ICT policy, training, and capacity building in the region, including delivering programs for UN agencies. He speaks multiple languages, traverses many countries and continents. It's difficult to get him on the internet, but he truly is the citizen of the world, at home, anywhere, everywhere. Over to you, Rajneesh.
Rather lengthy introduction, which I don't think I really deserve, but thank you anyway. As I was listening to our kind MCs introducing me, I just realized I feel a little bit bad about my fellow panelists here, because I'm not going to introduce them in that manner at all. I will not read out lengthy bios, so sorry guys. So let's get into it. First of all, I do agree that this event that has been put together, I've been given a bit of credit, but really the credit does go to the team that put it together on the ground here, which is the FICCI team. So just another round of applause for them, please, for doing a great job. And as well being able to attract so many nice and valuable high-profile speakers. So well done. So let me introduce the panel here today. So what we're going to be talking about is the multi-stakeholder model. Is it working? Is it not working? What do we need to do to improve it? As Mr. Desai said earlier today, don't fix it if it isn't broken. So is it broken? That's another question that I think I would ask. Let me first introduce the panelists. Again, no lengthy introductions. Starting from my right here is Professor Vivekanandan from Nalsa University. And he's also been a long-time acquaintance of mine, and we've been doing things at ICANN together. We have Ambassador David Gross, who perhaps most of you know or some of you know of, currently a partner at Wiley Rein and, of course, formerly from the U.S. government. We have Dr. Govind, CEO of NICSI, and a senior member of DIT. We have Virat Bhatia from AT&T, currently President of South Asian External Affairs. As well, of course, he's the chairman of the Communications and Digital Economy Committee of FICCI. We have Mr. Ram Mohan, a member of the board of directors for ICANN, and of course, CTO from Affilius. We have Ramanjit Singh, senior policy analyst from Google. And last but not least, my good friend, Mr. Parminderjit Singh, executive director for IT for Change, and we happen to be from the same part of Punjab, so good to have him here too. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I don't want lengthy speeches from my panelists. I don't think we are here for that. What I really want to do is to engage the audience a bit more. So what I will ask my kind panelists to do is to deliver some opening statements on what they think the Internet governance process is as applied to the multi-stakeholder model. And just to revisit, the session title is Global Internet Governance, Strengthening the Multi-Stakeholder Process. Before I start with the first speaker, I just wanted to read out a definition I found online of what the multi-stakeholder model is. Now, this resides on a website called icannwiki.com, so it's again free for people to edit. There is a disclaimer in this article which says this article is neutral but is sponsored by DIN Incorporated, a leading provider of DNS and DNSSEC services. So I thought I'd say that out front in the interest of transparency. So what it says is, a multi-stakeholder model is an organizational framework or structure which adopts the multi-stakeholder process of governance or policy making, which aims to bring together the primary stakeholders such as businesses, civil society, governments, research institutions, and non-government organizations to cooperate and participate in the dialogue, decision-making, and implementation of solutions to common problems or goals. A stakeholder refers to an individual, group, or organization that has a direct or indirect interest or stake in a particular organization. That is, a given action has the ability to influence the organization's actions, decisions, and policies to achieve results. Now, it all sounds pretty good, but as those of you who follow the internet governance debate would be aware, there are lots of thoughts and some good thoughts and some not so good thoughts in and around internet governance and how the multi-stakeholder model works. So I'm hoping that with our panelists as well, the audience will be able to perhaps do a deep dive on some of those issues and see what the general consensus of the room is. Further, I also wanted to read out what it says are the characteristics of the multi-stakeholder process. It reads, a multi-stakeholder process has the following characteristics: involvement of stakeholders in the learning process, stakeholders work towards a common goal, work involves different sectors and scale, the objective is focused to bring about change, which I thought is an important point here, deal with structural changes, another important characteristic, agreements are created based on cooperation, or consensus as we perhaps prefer to call it. Stakeholders deal with power and conflict consciously, and bottom-up and top-down strategies are integrated in governance and policy making. So with that, I would like to start with Mr. Ram Mohan from ICANN. If he could offer us perhaps 3 minutes or your thoughts on the topic and the issues.
Sure. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was just commenting to Virat that this is, it's exciting to be at this inaugural Internet governance event and watching both the caliber of the people and the caliber of the audience that is here. It's really been fun. So without further ado, I'm on the board of directors of ICANN. ICANN, for those of you who don't know, is Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And it's a body that is broadly speaking responsible for the coordination of the resources, the naming and numbering resources, and the protocol parameters that happen on the internet. The primary focus is on ensuring that the security and stability of the core of the internet works well. Now, the foundation of ICANN is really the following. ICANN is not a body in and of itself. You are ICANN, and if you want to be a part of ICANN, it's very easy to be in that mode. For instance, if you want to participate in ICANN, all you have to do is either go to the ICANN meetings that are held around the world, and ICANN has a model that says that it will not be in the same region all the time. It actually travels across the 5 regions of the world on a very set rotational basis. So you can attend in person. It doesn't cost you anything to actually register or be at the meeting. Anybody can come up. Anybody can come to a public microphone or can participate in almost all of the sessions and all of the workshops that are held in ICANN. So it's open and participative from that point of view. But ICANN is a little bit more than that. If you look at the way that the organization is actually structured, let's first talk about the governance of ICANN itself. The board of ICANN is responsible, has a fiduciary and other responsibility for how ICANN is run. That board itself is composed and consists of a multi-stakeholder model. That's how the board is brought together. It has people who are represented from the address registries. It has people from the security community. I'm the nominee from the security committee. It has people who are directly nominated from a nominating committee, right? And from the country code system, from the generic system, and from the ALAC, the at-large organization that is created to represent the interests of the common person. That's the governance of the organization itself is brought about in a multi-stakeholder model. But inside of ICANN, how a policy is made, the policy making is not in a closed room. You don't need to have prior right in order to be a part of the decision making. All you really need is the value of your ideas and the weight that you bring, that those ideas bring. It doesn't matter whether you're accredited by a country, whether you're not accredited by an organization. You can be an individual or you can be a part of an organization. You get a voice, and your voice is no less than anybody else's voice. And in ICANN, you have the Governmental Advisory Committee. 5 years ago, there were about 30 or 40 governments represented, about 110 or 120 governments represented in it right now. There's a generic name supporting organization, GNSO, lots of acronyms, right? This is the internet. You have to have a lot of acronyms. But inside of the GNSO, that consists of various stakeholder bodies, stakeholders that constitute that organization. So that has, for example, folks from intellectual property interests, folks from the business, from ISPs, from registries and registrars who are under contract with ICANN. It has representation from non-governmental organizations and not-for-profit organizations. And there are a couple of other pieces in ICANN. There is a country code name supporting organization, CCNSO. There is the At-Large Advisory Committee, ALAC, the Security and Stability Advisory Committee, and the Root Server Security Advisory Committee. So that's kind of the structure. But the real opening comment that I wanted to speak about was, is it working? And to me, before you actually talk about is it working, you have to figure out what is the characteristic of a multi-stakeholder model that allows you to say it is working or not. If you do not have metrics to measure something, you cannot improve something, right? And from my perspective, a couple of the key metrics on measurement and actually being able to say is multi-stakeholderism working, is it flexible? Can it expand? And is it scalable? To me, those are three important parameters. And in my years on ICANN and the time that I've been spending on the board, it's been fun to watch the flexibility and the expansion. The Cyber Cafe Association of India just recently applied to become a stakeholder organization, and that's going through in flying colors. The latest non-commercial organization that applied was the Computer Society of India. They got approved to become, a voice in shaping the direction. So to me, it's really those three things: flexible, expandable, and scalable. If those three are there, to me, that feels like that is a great foundation for a strong multi-stakeholder model.
Okay, thank you. So three things that you emphasize: flexible, scalable, and expandable. So I'm sure we'll come back to that as the discussions continue. Could I go to Dr. Govind, sir? And perhaps a bit of your perspective. You've been involved in the internet governance space for quite a while, and perhaps also the government's viewpoint perhaps on how multi-stakeholderism is working.
Thank you, Rajneesh. And I think the multi-stakeholder model is here to stay, as was spelled out very clearly during the inaugural session, and even earlier the Indian government has been following the Tunis agenda and the multi-stakeholder model involving all the stakeholders, right from the industry, academia, the governments, and everyone. And today we are strengthening those multi-stakeholder model again and again from this conference and from the other conferences. I'm seeing that, that movement which was not there earlier is picking up more and more, and how we react to the multi-stakeholder model. And there is no doubt that it is not going to stay, it is to be there, as the minister has spelled out, that the internet is not to be governed, but it has to be consensus involved, it can be done only through the multi-stakeholder model. So, and particularly for a country like India, where it is going to be internet is going to be expanded from the Asia Pacific region, and particularly in India, from the more and more users are coming, more and more applications are coming. So there is no way around than to go for a internet governance, which is an emerging area for discussions. And the government is into it, and the coming international events in the ICANN, and I am in the governmental advisory committee of the ICANN, and what Ram Mohan said is very right, that we are working with the ICANN board, which is a multi-stakeholder model, and where we are evolving the governmental issues, wherever it has to be interaction has to be made in the public policy manner. So whether it is the multilingual issues, the language issues, or whether it is the IPv6 issues, whether it is the new TLDs issues which is coming up, which is application round is over. So the objectionable round, and in fact the GAC, the Governmental Advisory Committee, is making a very, very significant contribution entire ecosystem of the ICANN, and again in the IGF, where the whole system is moving in a dialogue process. So I will only say that the government is into it, and government will be supporting all the time the multi-stakeholder system and multi-stakeholder model, and so that we move forward in a very appropriate manner in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I think the takeaway I have from that is that the government is indeed supportive of the process. And let's perhaps talk a little bit later on how we can get to that. Ramanjit, could I bring you in here and perhaps some comments on how you see the process working within India in terms of the multi-stakeholder process and perhaps some of the initiatives the government has put together as well as other organizations in the country?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rajneesh. So what I wanted to do before diving into that is to go a bit into background. I think many people, when they talk about global internet governance, it means different things to different people. And that's really the heart of some of the debates that you're seeing in India, but also internationally this year. The debates that you see are not just on core internet resources, not just about peering, not just about internet protocol allocation, not just about website domains. It's also about larger concerns such as things like cybersecurity, things such as concerns regarding free expression, and other controversial issues like that as well. But the important thing to just keep in mind when you're thinking about all of these issues is that global internet governance means many things, and they've been taking place at different levels. And I will go a bit more into what India is going here and what lessons we can learn. But there are two extremes I'll present you with, in a sense. So two interesting statements. So, for example, a couple of months ago, The Economist ran an article where they talked about in praise of chaos. They talked about the current system by which global internet governance works, particularly around core internet resources, the fantastic job ICANN does. And they pointed that out. That might seem chaotic. It might seem far too open to anyone who's in favor of regimented systems. It's especially odd if you're coming from a very traditional telecommunications world. But it works, and works surprisingly well in many levels. The other sort of opposite viewpoint, not an opposite viewpoint, but opposite statement, is a book I read a couple of years ago, something by Jack L. Goldsmith. And don't worry, he's not getting a commission out of my talking about this book. I never met the gentleman. I have read his articles. Jack Goldsmith co-authored a book called Who Controls the Internet? Illusions of a Borderless World. So that's the two, and that's why he pointed out that nation states have been looking at internet regulation for quite some time. But the best thing the book can tell you is the origins of ICANN, of IANA, and about how one simple man called John Postel literally remembered every single IP address and internet numbering address, and he was the internet numbering authority for 5 years, longer than that, 6 years. But what Goldsmith points out has been the fact that governments have been involved in internet governance issues in one way or another since 1999, but in different ways. So, for example, most of them have not necessarily gotten involved in the numbering process because they understand it works. But they have talked about issues such as interaction with local laws, things such as jurisdiction of courts, or other issues such as, for example, concerns regarding online content. They've intervened and they've put in some regulations, but they understand that ultimately the internet works as a global mechanism, as a global means of communication. But these are the two extremes you work with. So what I really wanted to flag here, therefore, the next step was that we need to look at global internet governance. You also need to look at domestic policy issues, certainly. And that's how you need to take multi-stakeholderism forward. Just to expand on the statement that my previous panelists have mentioned, talking about multi-stakeholderism is an important step when you're looking at global internet governance, but it also means the same thing domestically. In fact, multi-stakeholderism means that whenever you look at internet policy, whether it's ICANN, whether it's other discussions at international fora regarding international governance, but also local discussions around domestic policy, you talk to all community members at the same time. You share the same amount of information. And you realize that it's not just about the domestic lawmaking process that might be happening in that country. It's about building up multi-stakeholder input into every single part of how the internet works. So to give you an example of how this works, you've often heard this from other countries. Many of you may have heard about what Brazil does. So, for example, Brazil has an internet steering committee where members of the government, civil society, academia, technical experts jointly look at issues to provide suggestions, and then they see where those suggestions can be taken forward. They understand that one body, and their body as well, isn't the one governing authority for the internet. Some ideas will come out of there, which will be taken into national law. Some other ideas will be taken there and taken to discussions at ICANN, or discussions at the UN, or discussions to the ITU. And you can see, for example, the Brazilian Steering Committee's proposals to the International Telecommunications Union. And the important part of what they said, and what everyone's saying here, is you need to apply principles of multi-stakeholderism. So you recognize that the internet will never have one single governing body. But you also need to put forward ideas about how you consult with every stakeholder at every stage. And that's something that we're seeing here in India. The Internet Governance Conference here, with the Department of IT's strong involvement and support, is the first step of this. And the next steps, of course, will be looking at India's own proposals regarding global internet governance, whether it be at the UN, whether it be at the International Telecommunications Union, or even ICANN for itself, and talking about how everyone, not just here in this room, but even other people who are involved with the internet, as to how they can provide input in this process. So the next step for our conversation, in the sense the goal for all of our group here, is to put together the principles for how we can take forward multi-stakeholderism to the next stage, and also to put together what is India's internet agenda. So it's not just about the bodies we create, it's about the objectives we want. And those objectives have to respect a certain form of process. And that process is that the internet it's better to have the internet open, and it's better to have the internet be there for all, rather than for only one category of stakeholders.
Thank you, Raman. I think you had some interesting points to make there, and I'm hoping the audience will take on some of your comments there as we move into the next phase of this session. So now if I could bring in my good friend, the Professor Vivek.
So, I don't know whether I'm really part of the team of, bringing it to the next phase, but I was just thinking from, point of research, what we normally embark on, they're trying to distinguish between two keywords. One is multilateralism and another is multi-stakeholderism. Multilateralism seems to be very clear. Multilateralism is about states, and they have a long history. There are states which have succeeded, there are states which have failed, there are states which have been divided, but still states, they do deal, and that is called multilateralism. United Nations is one example of multilateralism. The other part of multi-stakeholderism, we love that word. It's a very happy word, but sometimes human psyche, if I start a family as a unit, there is no multi-stakeholderism in the family. It's a unwritten authority and unwritten power runs in it. And so we've got a very ambitious word called multi-stakeholderism. It looks nice as the goal, but to reach it, will it be mutually exclusive, or will there be a conflict between multilateralism and multi-stakeholderism? That has been the agenda the last 2 years, I would say, starting from Arab Spring to many things, including Indian context, the tension of multilateralism versus multi-stakeholderism. So, if I just little more put it, multi-stakeholderism again talks about, I really don't know who are all there in the multi-stakeholderism, and are they multi-stakeholder as a badge they wear, or they do have set ideologies? Whether they are themselves as jobless people, then I look at it. But I am part of a company, I am part of a government, I am also part of civil society. This multiple identity is what Amartya Sen would say. That also becomes part of multi-stakeholderism, which becomes the biggest task in terms of some way of researching and analyzing is how does this multi-stakeholderism vis-a-vis multilateralism is going to coexist, or whether they're going to have less tension, if not, full tension. The less tension seems to be the issue, because I don't see multilateralism going away. We don't see states going away. We don't see the traditional form of power and authority going away. And definitely the multi-stakeholders will be divided, at times supporting multilateralism, at times different. So I had the experience of ICANN as well as IGF. So if you really look at it, even forget about ICANN, IGF, if I take 81% of the people who attended last year IGF is by remote are from third world. So I really look at 19% of the one from the other world. So you really look at it, the participation wise, probably they will be more dependent upon multilateralism to talk about their voice rather than, multi-stakeholderism. So this you keep coming across various groups, what we are really talking in multi-stakeholderism. But if you consider, then where does this word spring from, which I will close in a minute, that we have some other round coming in, I have 1 or 2 points later to close with. So what I am trying to look at it, probably I looked at the research as the before internet and after internet, then look at power, authority, state, before internet and after internet. It looks like the scene, what is said is, pre-internet it's authority, post-internet it is anarchy. But anybody who knows political science will know that the word anarchy is nothing but an automated regulation, which is not the absence of a government, but everybody doing their own job is actually anarchy. But often in a pejorative sense, we tell that it has led to anarchy because the current authority, could not prevail over it. So the question what we are really looking at, that an ideal anarchy I would call it, or the practical anarchy which we use in many times are different. The theory part of ideal anarchy is one which regulates itself. And probably multi-stakeholder spirit is about regulating itself. Then the question will come often that what it wants to regulate, how far it can be united in regulating, and then if it can't, will multilateralism step inside? So that becomes the crucial question. So this internet technology, as the new media, what they call, is a push-pull technology compared to earlier media of television or radio, which is considered as push technologies, where it can be even co-opted as part of multilateralism, whereas internet is difficult to be co-opted as part of this multilateralism. So the tensions will come down. So how much stakeholders are going to compromise with the multilateral perspective, how much multilaterals are going to come down and co-opt, multi-stakeholderism seems to be the dice, the game, which will start now, and that will decide the fate of, or rather the vibrancy of multi-stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivek. So Parminder, I think I might bring you in here at this juncture because you had some opinions and comments to make on various governance lists as well as some very strong opinions on this whole process of multi-stakeholderism and internet governance. So could we hear from you, please?
Thank you, Rajneesh. I was planning to talk more on the theoretical side. Your excellent note for the workshop spoke about what is the connection between multi-stakeholder governance and principles like representation, participation, accountability, responsibility, and transparency. However, you have kicked off on more of a practical ground to see what is working or what is not working. I'll try to pitch somewhere in between and stop me when it's 3 minutes. Earlier today, the minister said that the definition of democracy is evolving and changing, and we move towards the concept of participatory democracy. And if I have to give a test to multi-stakeholderism, it is a test of democracy. You said flexibility, expandability, and scalability is your test, and I'd like to differ. I think a business would find these tests as pretty good. I don't judge a governance system on these 3 tests. If I had to judge a governance system, I would say whether it is able to address the policy gaps which arise. And if there are policy gaps, then the governance system is not working. And if it is not equitable, the test of democracy, then it is not working. And we are at the global internet governance. So we have to see, are there policy gaps globally? And I said there are huge numbers. We end up always talking about ICANN, and I really think ICANN does something very important. I'm not very concerned about that part because probably it does it very well. It's a very small part of how internet interacts with our social lives today. Very small part, efficiently done. I have no problems with it, not a huge amount. The oversight is not working. And even the ICANN, I wouldn't say them iconists, but whatever. The people with an ICANN also believe that oversight is not the way it is. It isn't working. And the rest of the areas where internet overlaps or impacts our social lives, social intermediaries, privacy, net neutrality, the host of issues where there are policy gaps. And if there are policy gaps, the system is not working. And second test is democracy. It is not working. Whatever is done is today made by the US as global law. It is made by the OECD as global law. Democratic countries are not making the laws, so it fails the test of, are there policy gaps? Yes, there are policy gaps, so it's not working. Is it democratic? It's not democratic, and therefore it's not working. So I think if we need to figure out whether the system is working, we have to give it the test of democracy. And if it really furthers participatory democracy, it's working. And quickly, I think there are 3 versions of democracy I see. The first version of democracy was when people got elected, they said, it's over now. We are the ministries, we will do whatever we wish to do. There was complete secrecy, aloofness from the public, and they made the laws, and people were supposed to just follow the laws. And the second phase, too, was when people start thinking, no, there's something called public consultations. They started having some kind of ad hoc committees. They would sometimes hold a workshop, take some views, and the Right of Information Act came through, whereby you could seek information. So we are in that phase normally among governments, where there was participation, but on the terms of the governments. And phase 3, I think, is what I should see what we should be doing, is when the institutions and processes of participation themselves get separately institutionalized outside the government systems, where there's very little influence of the government in making the agenda. They're independently funded, legitimized, supported, it's like judiciary and another organ of the government. So that those participatory systems are created. Now, if multi-stakeholderism is that, I'm an avid supporter of multi-stakeholderism. However, I do see multi-stakeholderism fail the test of democracy at many points, and wherever it fails, then I start doubting it. We spent a lot of time when we first institutionalized representative democracy. We need to spend the same kind of time, thought, deep discussions before we institutionalize the participatory democracy or multi-stakeholder, if you like it. However, we seem to be in a hurry to declare anything as multi-stakeholder. So that wouldn't work. And some of the norms, and I wouldn't go too deep into it, is that democracy is about giving extra voice to the people who normally wouldn't get voice. Participatory democracy is to see, well, election-based democracy is working, but some people are not having adequate voice. You're supposed to bring them in. Are the people who are normally left out are being brought in by multi-stakeholderism, or the people who already have a lot of voice already are getting more voice in the system? These are the tests of democracy, and in many places, these tests get failed. And the last point about consensus. Consensus is a good thing, sounds good. What could be worse? What could be better than consensus? But distributional issues do not get easily solved by consensus. In a society, especially in economic distribution, but also political, social power distribution, there are always different interests. They have to be negotiated through the process of politics, and consensus is not always the right answer. So all these cases, we need to have adequate political processes, and I think multi-stakeholderism should always seek the test of democracy and qualify from those tests of participatory democracy. And if it works, then multi-stakeholderism is doing well. Thank you, Rajneesh.
Thank you, Parminder. So, Virat, could I bring you in then? And in your recent experiences with internet governance, where are the policy gaps? And is democracy an issue?
So we've had an out-of-body experience in trying to organize this conference, and trying to get to the bottom of what multi-stakeholderism means. It is not FICCI's mandate every day to have a conference which has anybody other than industry and on some days the government. But to open up a dialogue to a set of people who, many of them have never been in this room before or before this conference, because that's not the discussion that occurs here, itself was a huge step for us to move towards what we took as the basic definition of multi-stakeholderism. So we have, I think, made a honest attempt. And I want to speak from practice on what we've done here. We, in general, I think, at FICCI, believe that the definition, at least of multi-stakeholderism, is reasonably settled out of the Tunis consensus. I think the fact that internet governance is the development of applications and development and application by government, the private sector, and the civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making, procedures, and programs that shape the evolution of the internet is a working definition that works by and large, and it's a definition that was evolved out of some thousands of, I suppose, the largest multi-stakeholder recognized summit ever held. Now the question is, what is the respective role and does it work? Then we get back to the question of multi-stakeholder versus multilateral. I think the multilateral piece is quite well settled. Let me just say, as somebody on the practicing side, as somebody who's been involved with and built or been a part of the industry that built telecom networks from the mid-90s, the mobile networks, which, by the way, between 95 and 2001 had 4 million subscribers. Between 2001 and 2008 had 250 million subscribers. And between 2008 and 2012 has about 930 million subscribers. That entire effort actually went ahead between two partners, the government and the private sector. There wasn't a lot of engagement with the civil society, and I think all of that is now starting in the last 2 years as new issues are cropping up. This really happened between two parties. They gave the license, we took the license, and the only person we allowed into a discussion at that time was the banks, because they had to fund this stuff, and the TRAI. But we are at 900 million. You like it or leave it. That's the number that you reached without really making it a multi-stakeholder dialogue. Internet, however, which started was liberalized in 1998, is creeping at 100 million, 120 million only. And it has many challenges. So even if you look at the main issues that were raised by the Honorable Minister today, which is as government as it gets, whether it was Akash, his main issue was to get it down from $39 to $35. That's going to happen through innovation in the private sector. So right there you get the private sector in. It is Bharat Broadband, which is the 20,000 crore investment that the government of India is making, is building the actual infrastructure, but unless you can get all the applications going, make the business case sustainable, get rural para-technicians to start working connectivity, it wouldn't work. So I think there is sufficient evidence to show that we better get used to and start evolving ourselves to the multi-stakeholder process in the true sense of definition rather than giving it lip service. There is absolutely no way this is going to work. I think they're all stakeholders. Private sector is certainly a settled stakeholder, but I can tell you from my interaction for the last 3 months with the civil society and the academia, their contribution to this conference actually is remarkable. That of the youth is remarkable. So as somebody who's had this out-of-body experience, multi-stakeholderism is perhaps the only way, and I think the respective roles have to be found. I think it's quite obvious that we tend to make decisions in silos, but I believe we are having teething problems. I don't think there is this serious bad intention. I think we must understand that, security forever has been under secret files. Cybersecurity can't work for a minute because the private sector owns 90% of the network elements and 90% of the subscribers in India. There is no way the government can move half an inch if the outside defense of cybersecurity, which is the network, is owned by private elements. And they recognize it. Ms. Reddy said that I'm working on a private-public partnership. That's not something that you heard from an NSA ever before. But in cybersecurity, they are. For traditional security, I don't think that will happen except buying, equipment or trucks or whatever. So I think even in the most multilateral area, which is cybersecurity, national security, the governments have come to the recognition, including in India, happily, that this dialogue is very important. We've had Mr. Sibal here twice in this room. We've had government come into discussions several times. I think the needle is moving. I think they're all getting to realize that we can't exist without each other. We'll have difference of opinions as we go along, but I suppose it's here to stay, and that definition of respective roles is continuing to evolve as we have this discussion.
Okay. Thanks. I'll come back to some of your points later, Virat. So let me bring in the good ambassador. You've had time to soak in the other 6 panelists. You've had great experiences in the past, of course, as being part of the U.S. government. So perhaps let's see what you have to say, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And thank you for allowing someone from outside of India to join this terrific panel. First of all, I'd like to thank FICCI. I'd like to thank the Internet Society, the other sponsors for putting on this terrific program. Although I am not from India, I've been coming to India probably longer than many people in this room have been alive. I first came to India in 1967 and have had the honor of coming here many times since then. So I mention that in part because with age comes a couple of things, and one of those things is to be able to step back and see extraordinary changes and transformation. There's a lot of discussion today and around the changes that we've seen just in a couple of years through the internet and mobile phones and other types of technology. But for those of us who've been associated with India a lot longer, the changes from what the India of the 1960s, when I first got to know the country, to the way it is today, it's almost unrecognizable. And I say that with great humility and great excitement. And I think the conversation we're having today with this first Indian Internet, I'll call it Internet Governance Forum, because IGF is a term that's used so globally, may well go down as being an historic event, because I think we are here at a tipping point looking back in history and looking ahead. Now, I say that for a number of reasons. Again, a little bit of history here. The discussions about multi-stakeholders and multi-stakeholderism has been going around globally for a long period of time. And in some respects, it is sort of the flavor of the day. The OECD just last year endorsed this on behalf of the OECD countries, together with a number of others, as being the path forward for Internet governance and the like. I go back to and think a lot about this in the negotiations associated with the UN Heads of State Summit, the World Summit on the Information Society that Nitin Desai referred to and others have referred to here today. That was a Heads of State UN summit that was very difficult. It was done in two phases, Geneva in 2003 and then Tunis in 2005. And Internet governance was at the heart of the difficult issues. And the path forward that governments, and that was a governments-only discussion despite some of the rhetoric, it turned into a governments-only negotiation. Governments themselves realized in 2005 that multi-stakeholderism was, in fact, the only way to deal with these issues. And that was an epiphany. That was an extraordinary moment where we moved away from a government-only top-down to a much broader-based approach. And the part of that epiphany was the creation of the Internet Governance Forum. And some of us in this room were a part of the creation of that. I see Sally Wentworth, for example, who was a part of that negotiation. She's now with the Internet Society. I had the great honor of leading the U.S. delegation in those negotiations. Many countries around the world were part of that, of course. But we didn't know what we were doing. We made it up, this Internet Governance Forum. We had no idea if anybody would come to the first one, and it was not that large. And it has grown and grown, and one indication of the success of that concept is the fact that we not only have on an annual basis a non-decision-making forum to discuss Internet governance issues that will be in Baku, as a number of people have indicated this year, but also we now have national Internet governance forums in many places and regional Internet governance forums. No requirement that these things be held, but in fact they spring up because there is the desire, this recognition of its importance. And this Indian Internet Governance Forum is the latest example, and I think in many respects the most exciting example. It's exciting and important because at its heart, the issue about multi-stakeholderism is finding the correct and most important sources of information to be inputted where it should be in decision-making processes. In the technical area, that has long been established, where technical experts, regardless of where they're from, come together, make decisions. So, too, we've had this in the legal area, where it's been less associated with a multi-stakeholder, but rather government in a top-down fashion, hopefully, in some instances, listening to the wider community. At its heart, the Internet Governance Forum has been extraordinarily successful globally by helping to not only work on the technical issues and the legal issues, but also setting international norms for how these very difficult issues can be done. Norms not as a matter of formal decisions, but rather of best practices, a sharing of approaches. I think the importance of the Indian Internet Governance Forum here is underscored by the importance of India. The statistics we have heard today of approximately a little less than 1 billion mobile phone users, of having 120 million or more Internet subscribers, together with India's historic role as a global leader, and particularly a leader for the developing world, makes us have an extraordinary opportunity here to go forward. Now, I believe that in the past, India sometimes has been, as one of the panelists at the first panel indicated, surrounded itself and made decisions that as it looked at who else, what other governments were supporting those positions, or the positions that India supported, was not the company that I know that India wants to be associated with. In the Internet area, there's now an opportunity to be associated with exactly the sorts of other governments, other institutions that make Indians across the board proud and have that leadership opportunity. We will have a test of that in the next couple of months. We will have the Internet Governance Forum in November, and I hope and I expect that it will be widely attended by people from India. But then, very importantly, we will have the ITU's World Conference on the International Telecommunications, the WICIT. That is a treaty-writing conference. It is at its heart not a multilateral. It is not at its heart a multi-stakeholder. It is a multilateral, classic multilateral. And the question will be, where does India come out on this treaty? Does it stand with those who seek free flow of information, for having flexibility, for having rules that are made not from the top down, but rather from organizations, whether it's ICANN or the IETF or others? Or will it try to seize control of Internet-related issues or not? This is going to be a test. Security will be an important part of it. Technical issues will be an important part of those discussions. And where India comes out will be extraordinarily important. It's an opportunity for India to show great leadership once again. I am confident, based on what I've heard over the past few months, as well as what we heard in the first panel, that the Indian government, together with Indian industry, Indian civil society, and others, will in fact be on the side of those who seek greater freedom, greater flexibility, and greater growth in that area. And that, I think, can be an extraordinary and exciting legacy of this event today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think the Honourable Minister earlier today stated very emphatically that India, or the government of India, would always support freedom of expression, and I hope that rings true when we go to these treaty conferences. Now, if we look at the session description that most of you would have read about this session, there were some key issues for discussion, and there were a couple of questions there, which I'd just like to read out, just so that we can reflect on them. How can the current system of Internet governance be improved? Is the current participation in Internet governance restrictive? Can different stakeholders legitimately influence policy? Beyond governments, engineers, and the technical community, are users' and citizens' engagement relevant in evolving this view, and should the general public care? In addition to that, there's a couple of others that I would like to add to it. Parminder talked about democracy. So is the process democratic? Vivek talked about the issue of multilateralism and multi-stakeholderism, and where do they meet, or where do they diverge, and how do they interact with each other. There's also, taking off my Internet Society hat here and my past ICANN hat, and I'll put on my Internet development hat, which I've worked in also for a number of years. One of the issues has always been is how do we actually involve more people in the conversation? Unfortunately, to get involved in the conversation, there is a cost associated with it. There is a cost to participate. To go to a meeting, I had some people early in the day today come up to me and say, are there any opportunities from the Internet Society that will let me go to the Internet Governance Forum and pay for my over there, and so on and so forth. So that's always an issue, and I think a lot of organizations have tried to address that, my own organization being one of them, by offering fellowships to not just the IGF, but IETF, as well as OECD and some of the World Bank initiatives. But, no one organization probably has the resources to go and fund everyone. So that's always a question. And then there are always issues about someone not being able to, a person is not that confident in putting forward their views because they don't know whether are they making a mistake, will they sound silly, will they get shot down. So, there are a couple of questions there. So I'd now like to go to the audience. You've heard what our esteemed panelists have had to say. You've read the session description. You've had some of my ramblings. Do you have any questions for the panelists? Are there questions in your mind? Yes, ma'am. When you do ask a question, if you could introduce yourself very briefly, just your name, your affiliation, organization, and then your question.
Do you need a microphone?
I think you do, yes. Ideally.
Would you like me to come up?
Yeah. Oh, okay. I can start singing if you want while we wait. And I'm a bad singer. You may all leave the room. But here we are. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Subhi Chaturvedi. I teach journalism and communication at Delhi University. I'm a filmmaker, photographer, and a curator, and I make interventions in new media technology. And I'm a PhD scholar at the IIT. So I know I'm not in competition, but I do try. Now, my interventions, a very specific question to Parminder. One of the things that filmmakers really are worried and scared of is when we make a film and the audience gets up and says, why? So we've had this conversation over a couple of sessions on what is it that needs to be fixed. And we know that the mandate for this session and all the other sessions really is to do future gazing and look at the crystal ball and figure out the way to go forward. I'd like us to step back a little. About 18 months ago, the CIRP was drafted. The document still does not exist in the public domain, so much so for multi-stakeholderism, transparency, accessibility. When you do a Google search, which throws up everything about everything, I still don't get access to the document. I don't know where to find it unless it's on the website for IT for Change. I also want to raise a question on multi-stakeholderism and how this process was orchestrated. How did we come about doing a policy which actually says in point 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that we will be regulating content, we'll also be writing treaties which are binding, treaties which supersede local laws. And what was the process really? Because I do hear and I do believe that this was done at the IPSA, and we no longer have our two partners on board. Brazil's backed out, so has South Africa. Who were the representatives from civil society? Is there a blanket definition of civil society? How did we really get to the point where we decided that, as the other panelists have also mentioned, that we'll stand by countries which have an abysmal record of human rights? We're talking about China, Rwanda. We're talking about countries where you can be hanged for blogging and dissent. And whatever happens to freedom of speech and expression. So, Parminder, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the precise question here. Yes, okay. I mean, I didn't, it's Indian government's policy, so they would tell you why they wrote it, where did they get the material from. I can tell you that IT for Change also made a proposal of SIRP about 2 years back. It is in public domain. It was addressed to the UN. It's slightly different from the Indian proposal. We talk about it all the time. IT for Change was responsible for bringing the enhanced cooperation discussion to IGFs. Enhanced cooperation and SIRP can be seen in the same light. There were resistance to discuss enhanced cooperation by people who are now on the side of transparency. Western governments, technical community, private business, they blocked discussions on enhanced cooperation. We took the example of Brazil, help a Brazilian government. That time Indian government was also not very proactive to discuss them. But I thought the biggest question here was what were we doing and whether the discussions were going on in this area. So, yeah. So whether it is representative of the society is a big claim to make, say yes, and that wouldn't mean anything, and saying no wouldn't mean anything. So I think that's your opinion rather than a question which we appreciate and take. But as far as a small NGO is concerned, we insisted that enhanced cooperation should be discussed. A lot of people stopped the discussion, and I can also inform you, all the people who are celebrating IGF today, ask them what was their opinion when IGF was formed. Most technical community and most private sector at Tunis, and I make this statement with full responsibility, were opposed to the IGF. And IGF was made despite them because of the insistence of the developing countries. You can go out and check this fact.
Yes, sir.
I really don't want to get into a slanging match on this issue, but I must take cognizance of the fact that today when governments talk about freedom, it's also true they invade other countries. So, the freedom word by itself doesn't mean anything. Just as you can be hanged for blogging, well, millions of people have been killed in certain countries by invading countries who today talk about freedom. So let's leave that out. Let's discuss internet governance and not talk about who is on what side. I think it's important what it has been argued, that what Vivekananda has said, that the question is, we are talking of multilateralism and multi-stakeholderism, and are we really setting one against the other? And it is true that there are the sphere of governments which are clearly their sovereign space. They have the right to protect that sovereign space, their economic space, and you have therefore a position where multi-stakeholderism can also be used to subvert sovereign space, and I think both issues need to be taken together to understand where the balance should be. I'm not at the moment trying to give one position against the other, but I think both should be understood. Countries have rights, and today it is very easy to use multi-stakeholderism also to subvert sovereign space of other countries, and I think that's an important issue.
Okay, I'll take one more question from the gentleman there, and then we'll go to the panelists.
Thank you, Chair. I'm G.D. Sharma. My question to Mr. Virat Bhatia, since you mentioned about cyber warfare, that's why I am posing this question. You are very right, more than 90% things are used in private, not with the government. However, our hardwares are not secured. Is there any plan of action with the private industry in PP with the government regarding manufacturing our own chips, developing our own embedded technology and operating system? Thank you.
I'm just going to stop that. That's not really related to internet governance. I mean, is there a specific angle to that with internet governance?
No. Since he raised the cyber warfare, that's why I raised this question.
I spoke about cyber.
He mentioned about cyber warfare.
Warfare. I said cyber security warfare.
Oh, okay, cyber. Even cyber security.
I can respond in a way after you.
Okay. Otherwise, I would not have raised it. If you feel it is not there, I withdraw the question.
Sir, may I answer that? The answer is...
No, I withdraw the question if you feel it is not there. Since he has mentioned, that's why I am here.
Sir, I am... आप मेरी तो सुने. Let me just say three things. The answer, I'm not the government, so I can't answer on behalf of the government, but I can... Sir, I'm trying to tell you, I'm not... Perhaps not even authorized to tell everything. I don't know. But I'll say this, that yes, there is a plan. I think you will be surprised how involved the government is in dialogue with the private sector in the last 3 to 4 months on the issue of cybersecurity. Shri Sachin Pilotji, as you know, is in Budapest today and tomorrow at a cyberspace conference which has 600 participants, about 4 or 5 or 8 ministers, but about 40 CEOs, because the pieces that have to go into cybersecurity, as you mentioned, the defense, the Ciscos and the BTs, they're all in that discussion. And equal amount of discussion is now happening in India with equipment manufacturers, with network providers. So that entire dialogue is on. I can't answer the question on chips because that I don't know. But to answer, but chips is the main thing, then I won't be able to answer that. If I may just try and answer that broadly, the answer is yes, sir. There seems to be a plan. It's a very encouraging plan. And I think there is a realization, and I can say this with some confidence because I've been in those meetings, that this can't work multilaterally alone. There is no way it will work domestically and certainly not globally. I'm not saying this. This is what the government has said to our face. So
okay, we'll leave that there. Ma'am?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I personally enjoyed the panel very much and thought it was great. One question that I had, which is I agree with, I think flexibility, scalability and expandability are good starting points.
Could you just introduce yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Bishakha Datta. I represent the Wikimedia Foundation. And what I wanted to say is I personally think flexible, expandable, scalable are good starting points for talking about internet governance as long as they're consistent with what Parminder, I'm sorry to refer to you by your first name, was talking about, which is as long as they sort of map the extremes, right, that they get in all the voices which are silenced, unheard, etc. But I wanted to actually ask about 2 other points. One is transparency. Is it enough to have something that's just flexible, scalable, expandable, or do we need transparency? And the second thing is, for us to think of this system as efficient and effective, I think communicability is another important criteria. I'll explain what I mean. We can look at stakeholders either as, government, business, civil society, etc., or we can look at the concept of stakeholders as potentially anybody who uses the internet or is affected by the internet. The truth of the matter is that at this moment, the whole governance of the internet is just unintelligible to any ordinary user of the internet, right? And you have to do a hell of a lot of work to actually make head or tail of this. Like, honestly, I'm quite deeply connected with the internet, but till I came here today, I had no clue. I mean, it's just too much research and too much work. So how can we sort of put this whole internet governance thing in a framework or devise it or conceptualize it so that it really makes sense to the zillions of internet users across the world and is understood by everybody?
I'll take one more question from the young lady right at the back. Yes, then I'll come to the panel straight after this question.
We have a clarification to make from Mr. Parminder.
Sorry, who's speaking?
I'm speaking.
Okay, I actually meant the young lady right behind you. But
we have the same question.
Same question, okay, yeah. Fair enough.
We have a clarification to make.
Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Sakshi, and we represent the SALT list. Do you think multi-stakeholderism stands the test of democracy?
And is that question to someone in particular?
Yes,
or to
Mr. Parminder.
Intervene here. So, Parminder, do you want to start by responding?
One short question, short answer to your question, ma'am, was that this conference in many ways is the first step to try and demystify stuff that even I didn't know, leave alone, people were not intimately involved. Every meeting we are learning more. Every meeting here, everybody is learning more. So just for those of you who think what all is involved in internet governance, look to that board, try and read up everything that's on there, and that's about 3% of what is involved. And just spend a few minutes as you listen to us. I mean, that's nothing. There is so much involved in that. So I think it is meetings like this, dissemination. Hopefully, internet itself should be used to make this easy dissemination and also involvement. But I think Ambassador Gross wanted to talk about the issue that.
Sure, Ambassador.
Thank you. A couple of quick points, if I may. One is perhaps in response there. There is no singular internet governance. Sometimes internet governance, the Secretary General of the ITU, Hamadan Touré, for example, speaks about internet governance as being narrowly defined as basically just being ICANN. As a result of WSIS and otherwise, I think the general consensus is internet governance is an almost infinitely expandable set of relationships, and therefore the frustration is easy to understand because there's no it's a lot of it there. Second is there was a comment earlier from the panel about the origins. This is probably trivia, but since I'm on the panel, I better put my 2 cents in. The origin of the Internet Governance Forum, and since I was one of the people who negotiated that, I know this painfully well, was established the night before the beginning of the second phase of the second phase of WSIS in Tunis, when Europe and the United States were at loggerheads. Europe had taken a position that they were trying to back out of gracefully on whether or not there should be a change in the control of ICANN. And the U.S. had said, I had said on behalf of the United States unequivocally, no. And the private negotiations at that summit the night before between Europe and the United States was the creation of the Internet Governance Forum that was based upon a 3-part position that we had taken earlier, that we, the United States government, would be willing to talk about Internet governance issues anytime, anywheres, with anyone. And the Europeans finally picked that up and said, we'll create the Internet Governance Forum. I certainly agree that nobody had a clue if it was going to be of interest to anybody other than maybe 7 people, and it turns out to have been a substantial success. Then the last point on, I thought your point was very interesting, perhaps not on the freedom part, but rather on the part on multilateralism versus multi-stakeholderism and the tension there. I think multi-stakeholderism is, in fact, at times in conflict with and in tension with multilateralism. I happen to think that's a good thing. That is, it's part of a shifting dynamics, but it's not necessarily to subvert it. It rather, in fact, for many governments would say, in fact, if appropriately done, you can have in a multilateral context multi-stakeholderism. For example, the U.S. has long had a wide variety of interest groups, including, for example, WICIT. There will be members of civil society, there will be members of corporations, there will be government and others represented directly on the delegation setting the policy for the negotiations. So it's a multi-stakeholderism even in a multilateral environment.
Okay, Ram, then Vivek.
Thank you. I wanted to respond very quickly to the intervention that you had made about what I had suggested were the three foundational pieces before you can even start working on multi-stakeholderism: flexible, expandable, and scalable. I completely agree with you that transparency is really important. In fact, if you look at one of the things that ICANN has done in its evolution, accountability and transparency were not part of the lingua franca inside of ICANN until just a few years ago. And then ICANN ended up signing and working and committing to both a transparency and an accountability framework. In fact, if you look at the ICANN board and you look at every single resolution that the ICANN board makes, every single decision that the ICANN board makes, there are a couple of things that ICANN has committed to. For instance, all resolutions will be published within 48 hours after they are done. It used to be a bit more secretive before. The second thing that it tries very hard to do is behind every resolution to actually provide a rationale for how it arrived at that position, right? And I can tell you that did not come easy. Inside of ICANN and inside of the board, it was not the most popular thing to do, because it's always easier to have 21 people sit around and say, we know what's best and we're just going to make the decision and go forward. But there's a commitment to doing that. But I completely agree with you. I think accountability is and transparency, they go hand in hand and they're important. And to the point of communicability or explaining, it's probably a challenge that we're going to have for a long time to come, because this is such a dynamic area. There are words that are being invented and words that are yet to be invented to explain what it is that we are trying to do. And we are trying to fit in some ways different analogies in other frames of reference to this. But the internet itself is still struggling to get clear expression. Some think the internet is a medium, entertainment, things like that. Others think it is a transport mechanism, bits and bytes, right? And yet others think of the internet itself as a place where democracy can thrive. So it feels to me that that explanation piece is really hard. The other question you had asked about was, the combination of that with Parminder's 2 points about can a model like this address policy gaps, and does it provide a democratic model? And I thought that while Parminder's 2 queries were really thought-provoking, I found myself a little puzzled with the model that says if it doesn't succeed, it therefore fails. I actually feel that with multi-stakeholderism, if it doesn't succeed, then the model has to evolve to see if it can embrace it, right? And it feels to me that democracy and a democratic model, multi-stakeholderism actually has probably the best shot of any other model to actually embrace the democracy principle. So I hope that helps.
I thought I will just try to little clarify when I did say about multilateralism and I thought multilateralism was there already. Multi-stakeholderism incorporates, as Tunis agenda says, government, private, and civil society, you call again NGO, whatever. The two are, in the multi-stakeholder, two actors seems to be a little more concrete for a long time. One is the state and another is the private enterprise. These two are strong, and it is more concrete. It has clearer goals and clearer processes of, at least, in theory. The question I raised about the tension, I said the mounting between the other stakeholder, which is often multi-stakeholderism, excitement flows from civil society, NGOs or individual participant coming in. That's how we are really looking at multi-stakeholderism as a new concept. And then I was trying to tell that in this is multilateralism will co-opt sometimes. They will co-opt, and then when there is a conflict position when it comes, then that is what you are really talking about, restriction. The question is what is right. Is it restrictive? Will it be restrictive? It will be restrictive if you are really talking about sovereign, if you are talking about power authority in the real world sense. Then internet governance cannot be a virtual world separate from your real world. That's why I said that multi-stakeholderism is not in families, is not there in associations, it's not there to look at that ideal multi-stakeholderism only in IGF or ICANN. It's going to be a square peg in a round hole. So what I am trying to tell about, probably we redo the engagement in a manner, taking multilateralism as a given thing. So each one trying to shape each other, multilateral institutes to shape themselves very differently, and then the other groups which are now engaged, I said internet is a new phenomena, which I said a push-pull technology. The remaining technologies were tools, whereas this seems to be a different process where every person could be a Rupert Murdoch and a publisher inside than what it was earlier. Everybody could be a person who can load something in a YouTube and be part of that. And this is the tension mounting for a long centuries. Governance with a little bit of tinkering could manage and accommodate, but this seems to be a new game. So in this new game, as I said, the word anarchy and authority, right? So that has deeper meaning. I said I'm not denigrating the word anarchy in one sense. This is the large issue which is going to be now on, which in turn will talk about the future of multi-stakeholders, which will talk about multi-stakeholders. So in a sense, I'm veering around to the point of Parminder, including the question, very basic political science question, what is democracy? So the point is, as Parminder was pointing out, this politics has to be engaged. And if in multi-stakeholderism, these two entities have very clear structure of communicating to talk about on question of communication. When it comes to the other groups, they really have to agitate. They have to really come on the roads and maybe take some concessions, get some concessions. That is the way they have to move. And plus, they have to manage their inner contradictions. Whereas the other one seems to be much, much clearer compared to the third leg, I call it. Three legs, if we call, broadly, civil society, whatever meaning you want to give to civil society, NGO, whatever their ideas. On the other side, the government and private, there seems to be, these two entities seem to be longer players, and the third entity has come inside, right? Or probably, is it because it's something, a big mind change, or you say that you can't beat them, co-opt them? That's a kind of angle. Many times you have to look at it. So this is the hard reality, in my opinion, about how to, really set a framework of 2012 onwards. Then the past multi-stakeholder, if it is a very politically correct word, it's a very nice word to talk, it's a very nice word, probably it ends up with conferences and workshops. And it doesn't move further. If it has to move further, we are really looking at this engagement in a realistic framework. That realistic framework also brings me to the question, one of the first question person asked about, leave alone who drafted that part of the, RTA part of the whole business. I'm coming to the larger question about the whole meeting which is going to happen in Dubai, and the whole understanding of some other countries which are going to which are talking about UN oversight, and somebody said Brazil left us, South Africa left us, many leave, that doesn't matter. The point is, or probably they can come back again, so that's a different proposition. This again is multilateral real politics, what we have to do. So two ways we are really looking, the ideal and the real. In my opinion, the ideal is the best thing to keep in mind, but you need to work real, or rather think global, act local is one thing which is going to be true in internet also.
Okay, Virat, and then we'll take a few more questions.
I just wanted to make a quick point, which is multilateralism really has to be facilitated. And those who are, as the professor described, the multilateral structure you described as the government and the private sector, I think we certainly have greater resources than civil society, the academic can put out immediately. But I think it would be stupid of us and foolish in the short term, not even in the long term, if we believe we can move the needle on this without actually engaging somebody. In this conference, when we engaged everybody, did it slow things down? Of course it did. Did it expand the agenda beyond our imagination? Yes, it did. But the biggest issue that the civil society and the academia wanted, and they've had 2 sessions and another one, is on hate speech. It was not the biggest deal for the private sector, but it was that what they wanted, that's what got done. It probably has the best speakers, by the way. Media has its own sessions on how they're competing with the internet, so they wanted their own session. All of this agenda expanded, the timing expanded, and there were some requests for assistance to facilitate the participation of the civil society and academia. And we immediately did it, because if we try and pretend that this is multi-stakeholder, but please don't come to the MAG meeting, or don't have your own session, or I'm sorry, if you can't pay, then you can't be here. The moment you go there, and that's very easy for us to do, very, very easy. That is a huge mistake, and I think that mistake has been made several times by people because they realize that the ones that don't have resources or voice can be sort of kept out there. I think that's the barrier that we thought we crossed with this conference in small sense. I can tell you when this is over, there'll be people standing outside, we didn't get invited, we didn't get called. I'm sure we'll get that stuff. There's no question about that. But to me, multi-stakeholderism has to be facilitated by those who are in the center. I just wanted to, again, give the practical experience.
Okay, Parminder, just to respond to
so the 2 parts I would respond to. One is a thing which emerged from Subi's first intervention and also Ambassador Gross' intervention. I think I need to say something here, because there has been in international politics some painting of blacks and whites, which is rather non-nuanced. And India, we as an organization, as an NGO, oppose India government almost on everything domestically. I mean, we oppose the IT Act, we oppose the e-governance. Yeah, we will go to our website, please. Our e-governance policies, we are opposing their RSBY health plans. Ajwani, please go to the website, and otherwise don't interfere like that. So the issue is that I have seen criticism of India sit there, so let me also talk about those who have been painted in white. I've already said IGA was opposed by the Western countries, by the technical community and the private sector. Then there was an agreement that IGF should do capacity building and not a policy dialogue till almost the last few hours. And then developing countries insisted that it should be a policy dialogue forum. A developing country diplomat did say, we don't want the Western countries to make a school for the developing countries to learn internet governance. And these kind of discussions, I was sitting there, Ambassador Gross was inside, more privy to many consultations, but this is a fact. US refused to be a part of WIGIG, the first multi-stakeholder group on IG discussion, because they thought, I mean, that's not the kind of thing we want. So let's be careful about how the international system is nuanced. India does know which countries they stand with. India also knows which country have an absolutely bad record on intellectual property, which is completely destroying the economic structure globally. What kind of trade laws are being made? So be a little more balanced on that kind of thing, which something is what Prabir also mentioned. Now, going to the question of that lady, which is very basic, what's the connection between democracy and multi-stakeholderism, whether it passes the test or not? I said that if it is a version 3 of democracy, which is participatory democracy being institutionalized, where the agenda shaping takes place outside the influence of the government, is independently funded, independently legitimized and supported, this is what is multi-stakeholderism. I am fine with it, but if it is a part of democracy and it is not challenging democracy, there's a clear separation on what is input giving process and what is the decision making process, who makes the final laws, whether that is representative of democracy's function or not. If these things are very clear, then multi-stakeholderism is fine as a part of democracy. And Virat did speak a lot about facilitating multi-stakeholderism. I have some issues with that. Nobody's speaking against this conference, which is a very, very huge step for opening up the internet governance dialogue. But it's normally known in democracy that funds are connected with agenda setting. And there's a separation there's effort to see that the resources and the funds do not influence agenda setting. So I think resource is always a question, and public funding is always the best thing for any kind of policy processes. And there are a huge number of things which are always recognized in democracy. If multi-stakeholderism passes that test, there's something called conflict of interest. There's difference between public interest and private interest. There's always an extraordinary emphasis to bring in the voices of the marginalized sections. Now, there are many things which we traditionally know what political philosophy of democracy is about. Multi-stakeholderism can take that test, and if it is a part of democracy, is a part of enhancing democracy, then it's right.
Okay, I just want to do a time check now. We've got roughly 10 to 15 minutes left. So the first question to Virat, can we go over, or do we have a hard stop at 7:15?
I'll leave it to the audience. They want 10 minutes more.
Because I see a lot of hands flying up.
Yeah,
so
let's take a vote there.
So democracy in action. Do we extend the time by, let's say? Yes, there we go. Multi-stakeholders. Well, all the buzzwords are here.
Can I start speaking?
1 second. So do we want to extend the time or not?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. So, yes, madam. Right. And then Naresh.
My question is to Mr. Virat Bhatia. My name is Shaila Rashid, and I'm speaking in my personal capacity right now. You said that governments are taking extraordinary interest in the dialogue process and really engaging in policy making with regard to internet governance. Do you think they're doing this for the sake of democracy or for the sake of greater involvement of people? Or do they want to make policies for governing internet in the way it works and the way it's scrutinized well before the majority of our people lay their hands on internet? What do you think is the reason?
So my experience actually is, I don't have a conspiracy theory behind this because it's based on my everyday dialogue. I go to see the Bharat Broadband CEO, so $4 billion being invested. He tells us at the end of the day, look, the transport infrastructure is there. I can't go beyond this stuff. You better start getting the business models ready, and we're going to give you 60 panchayats who are going to be up and running by 15th October. Now go make this work. So even in access, which is pure, simple, there is no great politics happening there, he says we can't do this without you. On cybersecurity, the National Security Advisor reaches out, says, look, you guys own the network, we can't do this alone, get everybody together, get NASSCOM into this stuff, FICCI is in there, COI, those are missing, we say bring them in, otherwise we can't do this. So there is I think there is a realization on hate speech. I got a call from the government saying, what do you think? He said, would you like to meet the people? They said yes, and I can tell you with some pride that the Secretary DOT said to me on the phone that not only will I come and be there for 3 hours, but I want our worst critics to be invited to this meeting. And he sat through 3 hours. Then he called me and said, can you please give us the written abridged version of everything that was discussed so that we are going to have a meeting internally, it's company of secretaries meeting, and we want to discuss what you told us. And one of the big suggestions was that the government should use social media. I think you made that point up there, right? So the government should use social media to counter social media.
Yeah.
And immediately after that, you had the Twitter press conference by Mr. Petroda. Now, I'm not saying that's a great idea of ours, but government is adopting that. So whether it's access, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it is multilingualism, whether it is, they're, I think, coming to the point that they think they'll have to engage. I think the one that is entirely was thought to be in the government domain was cybersecurity. And I think there it's very clear that it won't work without the private sector. And if I may, and I think we are not at the stage where they're willing to, or they're ready, or they have planned to speak to civil society, but I hope they do. At least we are saying it. We're already saying it in meetings that it's not good enough to be only talking to us. Talk to them as well, because the other side of cybersecurity is takedowns, surveillance, and blocking. That's how cybersecurity works. That affects the civil society. They'll jump onto this if we don't get them in the meeting now. So I think it's stage by stage, but very quickly in the last 4 months, it's quite different. That's what I want to say. We just hope that the test is, the global test of what we do is Baku, and I think in some ways wicked. I think that's the question actually I have for Bhavendra, what he thinks of the ITU piece. I mean, because there is one is the UNCIRP thing, and then there is ITU, which is, standard setting body. But a lot of cybersecurity issues and all that are now sort of going there, and what you think of that part. I hope I answered your piece. There's no conspiracy theory here. They're, reaching out, and I think they're getting used to this stuff, but quickly.
I'm sorry, I can't think of a less controversial example, and I'm still speaking in my personal capacity, but as we speak, There's a partial ban on SMS, Facebook, and YouTube in Kashmir. So really, what kind of freedom are we talking about? I mean, the government of India's official stand, if it's to support freedom of expression, that's just...
But the only way we resolve this is dialogue, and that's what we're offering. I mean, they're all here today. 8 of them were national security advisors in an internet governance conference. So this is the beginning, right? This is the dialogue that's going to resolve it. It's going to resolve it. I hope it's going to resolve it. That's my hope.
So, to Naresh, please.
Naresh Ajwani. I represent Common Man's Medium Association. That's a cyber cafe. 180,000 cyber cafes and 60% of internet users in India. And that's why I'm not intimidated, neither domestic nor international. And I don't make people afraid of international politics. I have 2 short and simple questions, and I would appreciate if the panelists can respond me in parts. My question number 1 is, do they consider internet as a leveler?
Okay. And the second question?
Second is based on their answer.
So in the spirit of democracy, I've got a feeling we'll be here till at least midnight or maybe even tomorrow morning.
Mine was a short and simple, and I appreciate short and simple answer.
Okay, short
yes
and simple answer
no.
for Naresh.
I'll first answer Virat because he specifically asked me this question of what I think about the politics at ITU. I think ITU has no business to take over the standard making processes which are being done in what I would call an ICANN plus ITF, etc. system. Actually, I have, during my many discussions, advocated that we should at the same time legally recognize this broad distributed system as the one which is making these kind of standards. Because that kind of recognition is also due, because for too long we keep on fighting because there's one side who says that that side doesn't probably exist. And however, at the same time as we oppose certain countries, going to ITU to try to take over certain kind of legitimate, and I deliberately say legitimate, access to levers of internet governance, which I think is wrong, we should also internationalize the oversight of the ICANN system, recognize the distributed ICANN system as the legitimate one where bottom-up standards making should take place as the place where standard making takes place, internationalize the oversight system, and provide a UN kind of a place where general addressing of the non-ICANN policies, which is what the CIRP generally is supposed to takes place. So once you give them that model, that reduces their attraction of going to the ITU, and I'm very clear that I don't think that ITU should take up standard makings, which is being done in a distributed manner at present. However, there's another side of it. There are certain infrastructural parts of the internet which have probably to be clarified as a part of the continued mandate of the ITU. And there's also a small other issue between what's in a name, whether it's a telecom or internet. I think the biggest thing about is definitional issues around the ITRs. And we also know that there are problems. Your company AT&T has filed with FCC that almost all kind of telecom services should now be considered informational services, and that completely puts away all services from the pale of regulation. And I'm talking about this regulation, not freedom of expression regulation. This is common carriage regulation. This is providing access to underserved regions, cost controls, the roaming kind of things we are doing. So we also need certain kind of regulation which takes care of people who are underserviced and marginalized. So what's in the name has become an issue, whether it's telecom or internet. So that should be taken into consideration.
Okay, so I'll just stop this here because we have a session on ITRs tomorrow actually, and perhaps that conversation can continue there. So to Mr. Ajwani's question, gentlemen, anyone brave enough to answer?
I would appreciate if it is in a yes or no. Then
is it a leveler, right?
Yes, that's right.
It is yes or no.
So many times when we hear these specialists, really, this is what they do to us. They confuse us completely, and that's why I said I represent common man. So kindly give me a response the common man can understand.
See, if a common man can be intelligent enough to get the response and ask the second question, are you really a common man? So anyway,
oh my God!
Okay,
I asked for a problem by asking this question.
Ajwani, I mean,
it has become so difficult for you people to respond.
No. Leveler. You said leveler. I said yes and no in the sense. When I said that if you have access, it's a great leveler. If there is no access, as I said that haves and have-nots was the old idiom. Knows and know-nots is the new idiom. What we are really looking at digital divide, so many things. So I could not get with a very simple question. It's a leveler. In what context you are really looking at it? You are looking at leveler in terms of economics, in terms of politics, access. That is very important. Otherwise I can't properly answer yes or no if I don't get the correct meaning of the word leveler.
Anyone else care to respond?
I had no conspiracy, nor any complicity in this question. It was a simple question. If we have today image of the internet as a leveler, please appreciate the people who are governing it and have arrived at this position. They are the ones who have really brought this kind of a thought in the minds of so many billions of people that internet is empowerment. Today, when it has become an empowerment, we are showing the threats of those countries and those governing bodies, which is really bewildering me. And that was my only limited point and a submission.
My answer is yes. As cyber cave is concerned, it's a leveler.
Thank you very much.
But if it is above cyber cave, there are issues which are not leveler. That's what I'm trying to tell.
If we all consider it as a leveler, we must at least give a hand to those people who are responsible for it. And definitely, ICANN has played a role in this regard. So at least if others don't clap, I would clap for ICANN. Great job, Ram Mohan.
Okay, Ambassador?
I'm not sure. We're not trying to get into word games about the term leveler. With regard to Internet, I think whatever that term means is yet to be decided. I look around the world and I see the extraordinary impact that the Internet has had. Everyone here would easily agree. But let's look at India for a moment. What's extraordinary is you have over 900 million mobile phone subscribers. We have, I think, an impressive number of Internet subscribers, 120. And I think everyone would agree with the emergence of smartphones and related technologies that the amount of Internet access to everyone, common man and others here in India, will soar in ways we cannot even predict accurately in a very short period of time. Then we will have an idea. But what will drive that? And for me, what will drive that is very clear. It is not government controls. We had over 100 years of government controls over the telephony industry, and we saw remarkably little innovation. And the digital divide that we speak so much about is largely because of that lack of access. What has created the access is unfettered competition globally, smart people creating smart new technologies that were then allowed to come into the marketplace, drive costs down, innovation up, a sweet spot for Indian entrepreneurs. And I think that what we'll see is if there is no heavy hand of governmental regulation globally at WICET or otherwise, that in fact we'll see whether or not it was in fact a leveler here and globally.
Okay. Sir?
I'm Ashish Joshi, a civil servant. I came here because I got the information on Facebook event, which was made by Subi. See, I don't know why the debate is on. I'll make a comment and a suggestion. It's a leveler, internet, and if you combine it with television, certainly it is a leveler. Few years back, for getting a railway ticket used to take hell of a time. Now for any common man, he can go and get a ticket. He doesn't have to have an internet connection himself. So you have a facility of kiosks across the country. Coming back to what Van Gogh said, you see, I mean, there is a discussion going on multi-stakeholderism and multilateralism. I am a student of history. You see trends. Democracy itself is evolving. This whole thing is evolutionary. It is the multilateralism which will have to adjust to multi-stakeholder. Who is the most important stakeholder? Nobody has mentioned about that. But the main stakeholder are the people.
Internet is accessible to each and every person. You, me, I, everyone is a stakeholder. Coming back to the suggestion is there has to be a reconciliation, and the democracy and the forces unleashed will force the governments to adjust. I am speaking in my personal capacity. I just want to qualify. Now
you have to say that 5 times before, after.
So see, why do I say that? I mentioned this because what Parminder said, it is about good practices. I am only reiterating a good practice that I am saying it is in my personal capacity. So all the stakeholders have to work on good practices. As far as the government is concerned, there are 2 issues. One is of freedom of speech, privacy, and your security. Now there has to be an exclusion. You know, whether it is United Nations or whether it is Institute of Public Standards Accounting Board across the world, they have an exclusion list where the government certainly can decide, like this the lady mentioned about Jammu and Kashmir. I was posted in Jammu Kashmir. That time we were having this problem of bomb blast being used through a pressure cooker through a SIM. So the verifications of telephones had to be done. It is 2005-2006. So the Department of Telecom initiated verification of telephones. What's wrong in that? So kind of balance need to be found, and the people themselves will solve it. Where there is democracy, people will not let internet to be restricted. One of the ministers learnt it hard way. And where there is no democracy, people will force it, like the Spring Revolution in Arab. Thank you.
Sir, just to clarify.
Yeah, hello. Okay, do you want to finish that, whatever you want to clarify?
Point, sir. Just to clarify, I'm not talking about the verification. The government should by all means have rules for verification. This is about the partial ban on SMS. That is SMS ban on prepaid phones since 2010. So for 2 years, prepaid customers, which form 90% of the customer base, cannot send SMS or receive it on their mobile phone. That's what it's about. And this is being done in the name of law and order. It happened when there was a northeast exodus from Bangalore. The government banned, put a 5 SMS limit ban, a 5 SMS per day limit on SMS, and they had to revoke it within, I guess, a week or so.
I think we'll stop the discussion there. This is not really what we're here for. Ma'am?
Yeah, my name is Geeta Seshu. I'm based in Mumbai. I represent the Hoot. It's a media watch site. I was really glad to hear the minister speak earlier in the day about transparency and accountability, because I think that's about the first time I've heard him speak about it. I don't think he's ever talked about these 2 issues ever before. My thinking really about the entire, all the sessions we've been through today is that these 2 catchwords are really important, and not just as catchwords, because every single component of this multi-stakeholder approach really needs to internalize transparency and accountability, whether it's government, corporates, or even civil society. It's only then that it will work, because our experience, and I track free speech issues, is that we've not had that kind of transparency and accountability from 2 of these components of what you call the multi-stakeholders, either from the government or from the corporate houses. We've had instances where corporate houses have, telecom companies have blocked, mobile SIM cards and SMS services in different parts of the country, including in Kolkata. And when people have made attempts to find out what happened, the companies have not bothered to respond. So I fear that this multi-stakeholder approach will really be something where, all 3 members need to work together, but I think we need to figure out what kind of principles we set in motion to have it work. And if we don't start discussing those principles, we don't start discussing them and actually putting them into place, we can talk about it till the end of time, and really we won't get anywhere. The second point I really wanted to make very quickly is is that, when we speak about things like transparency or accountability or otherwise, we really have to broaden this to all kinds of internet users. And earlier in the day, there was a question from a very young member of the audience who spoke about how we're expecting transparency, we're expecting accountability from young users, young online users, but we don't expect the same from adults. And I found that, response was really sad, because I wish the speakers it was addressed to responded correctly to it, because, media response or, media responsibility on this is really lacking. So we need to discuss that also at some point.
Okay, so Naveen, you had a question? And then I'll take one more question, then we'll go to the panelists to wrap it all up.
Hi, I'm Naveen Tandon. I'm representing ACTO, and a member of the MAG. One thought I wanted to share with the group is that whether multi-stakeholder process be compartmentalized in terms of engagement, because quite a number of times what happens is you engage, the industry engages, but at one point of time it's a full stop saying we have a sovereign right. We know what is best for the country in the interest of the state. So there is a kind of a dichotomy between engaging with the industry and then bringing in the sovereign right into the discussion, which completely evaporates the entire essence of the discussion. So is there any way we can match it up so that the multi-stakeholder engagement continues from the inception of the idea, framing the process and putting it in up to the implementation state? Because especially in the implementation stage, we don't see much of recommendations coming through at a number of times. So is there any way we can engage it further and make it more inclusive?
So is there someone you want to answer the question? Or
no, we just
yeah, and there's another one there, so I'll...
I'm just hanging on the coattails of Geeta as well as Nitin. I have even a worse position than that. I'm just very pleased to see so many people here, so many of the people who I've run into, whether we were trying to take up a cause with the government or the industry or the civil society. It's probably one of those platforms where Virat, his team, and everyone else has been able to get together a lot of people and start a discussion. But I do not know what we are aiming after this, what after this conference. Tomorrow, when I want to go and talk to a policymaker, I cannot really get together all the people you were able to get together in the same room. When I go and talk to the industry, if I'm talking about privacy, Facebook doesn't want to talk to me. But if I'm talking about intermediary liability, then I am their partner. So I really don't know when I have a seat in the room on the table and when I don't have that seat. And that's not me. I'm sure there are so many of these organizations who are supporting here, and we all are trying to find ways of engaging. And we are innovating as we go in terms of engagement. Sometimes you think, oh, this political party has an interest, maybe I'll go and actually ring their doorbell and they would listen. So we do not know when the industry is with us. We do not know when the government is going to talk to us. We do not know what is the right process. There's nothing set in stone here. FICCI's done a great job. I think this is a good platform. But I do not know whether this platform is a continuous thing or are you going to it's going to be an annual thing, but in the way internet works, by that time we'll be living in a different world altogether. So I'm not sure what are we looking at, or are you, or is there a promise here that there is a way the multi-stakeholder model is going to follow?
Okay, so yes, you ma'am, and then sir, you in the front.
So I was interested in a point that...
Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, sorry. I'm Chinmayi Arun. I'm Assistant Professor of Law at National Law University, Delhi, and I'm also a CIS Fellow. One of my interests, apart from working with media policy and Internet governance, is regulatory theory. So what I'm going to say comes a little bit from that perspective. I was very interested in the point made earlier, which is that when we set up a multi-stakeholder body, we need to be quite clear about what we're trying to achieve and who's going to bring what perspective to the table. So for instance, as a law teacher, you don't want to listen to what I have to say about what sort of software needs to be developed, because I don't know about the specifics of how this is done. But on the other hand, what you might what you might want to ask me about is, say, a situation like cybersecurity, like you were describing, which is that if you're creating a surveillance-based system, what kind of procedures do you want to create to make sure that nobody's rights are being trampled upon? And I think that we should see this in the context of the power of the different people that come to the table, right? So the state is ultra-powerful, which is why our rights to free speech, for instance, were originally offered against the state. And increasingly, as we all know, corporations are getting quite powerful too, especially on the internet. And so the reason that I intervened is to say that right now we think of the internet as an inclusive space where people fight for their rights and enforce them, but it won't necessarily stay that way. Simply because once we get habituated to giving up our rights, we sort of forget that we need to fight for them. And the classic example of this is broadcasting. 10 years back, did any of us feel deprived because we were not able to broadcast to our neighbors? But the truth is that it was the architecture and the state policy that made it that way. And then we didn't really think to contest it because we got used to it. And I think that from that perspective, it's really important to create the multi-stakeholder process, which is not just transparent, because transparent is just telling you what's going on, but is accessible. And that doesn't mean that the government has to do all the 100 contradictory things that different people tell it to do, but just that the government should be actively seeking inputs and should be responding just to let us know what kinds of inputs are being accepted and why, so that citizens can understand how this process is working and why they're making the choices that they're making.
Okay, sir, you in the front.
Hi, my name is Pranish Prakash. I work with the Center for Internet and Society. I just had a question about, actually the last few questions kind of touched upon what I wanted to say, which is about what do we do domestically, because the Indian government internationally speaks the language of multi-stakeholderism beautifully. It has been doing so for a long time. Domestically, that's not been the case. Domestically, we don't really see much multi-stakeholderism in action, in play. Sure, in the past few months, there's a little bit more of that, so I'm very hopeful about the future. But I'd like to know a little bit more about what opinions about what we can do very concretely, apart from a dialogue space, which is what this is, apart from a dialogue space, to actually push forward multi-stakeholderism in the decision-making processes around issues on the internet. I saw that the Brazilian model had been raised, and I know people on the panel have opinions about that. And I also just want to quickly flag the issue of transparency. It's something that's required from all stakeholders in a process like this. I think all stakeholders benefit by being just to give a few examples, for instance.
Could you hurry
I'll just run. Yeah, Airtel, for instance, in its 2010 annual report, tells us they received more than 400 letters of commendation from law enforcement agencies for helping them with surveillance. They don't tell us how many requests for surveillance they received. They don't tell us how many they complied with, etc. Okay, now that kind of stuff is completely non-transparent, and you can't have civil society commenting about this because there's nothing for you to comment on, right? Civil society organizations have to be transparent about their funding, etc. So every
okay, last sentence.
Just that. So that transparency works at multiple levels,
okay.
And yeah.
Okay, I'll allow one more question from this side, because this side's been a bit quiet. So Shiva, you had your hand up, and then let's wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm Shiva from Internet Society India, Chennai. And the lady who spoke a short while ago asked a question, is this going to be an annual process? I want to modify the question a little and ask, can this be an everyday process? Is there some way that Virat's efforts can be furthered by setting up a collaborative web space where everyone comes in and discusses policy issues continuously? And another thing is there some way by which you could take the next step and make the MAG more inclusive, go on an all-out call for participation within business, within civil society, within government, and make this process more inclusive. It's a very good first step. I want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you. Thank you. There you are, Rishi. The first critique comes up. This is the organizer telling us that can we make it more participative. I don't even need critics outside. So let me just respond. He's from ISOC Chennai. So there you go. Let me just stop.
I didn't say anything. I've been
yeah. So there you go. In terms of coordination between the organizers. So we'll deal with it. I'll just say this to you. In terms of our sort of what are the plans next, mine basically is to go on leave for about 3 weeks. And I know you want me to do this on a daily basis. That's like, oh, really?
Virat, I'm just conceding all the goodness to you and all the success to you and attributing all the success to you.
But to answer your question and to answer the question that was made here about is this going into decision making, I'll say the following. Firstly, this meeting is being recorded. We have, is ENY here? Can they raise their hand? There they are. There are 2 people from ENY serving as editors to every session, and all what is being stated is also being recorded and is being taken as transcript. There is an agreement with the government to give them the bound version of what has been discussed in each of the sessions. On the pre-sessions that we have had, they have asked for digest, as I said. Not only have they asked digest, they've called me to remind me that I'm missing my deadline on the digest. And I have had to call people, and there are people here who send out responses saying, you guys are late, we can't do this, and then 3 reminders down, and they gave it to us, and I've learned my lesson to give a week inside our own system. But they all responded, and we gave it to them, and they said, thank you, we're going to take this up. So I think they are looking at a process to use information that's coming in. I think there's a lot of pressure inside the government to say what happened wasn't, didn't quite work perfectly. And I think, as I said, it's a teething issue. There is no great sometimes it looks like conspiracy. My humble opinion is that there are some challenges, but there are also an openness to start. So, A, there is a continuity by way of submitting what we have. B, we hope to make this a regular event. C, we want to give a call for an even bigger open session and have people invited right from get-go so that they can plan the agenda and give us more time and less work for just 1 or 2 people to run this long. So all of that, the answer is yes. But to answer Pranesh's question, which is that, can we start influencing decision? I think we won't see a change in 2 months, but it is our belief in the way TRAI works. For example, I don't know if you're aware that it's statutorily mandated to have consultation, which then reflects in it, in the responses. I think some sort of informal process is developing here. I think the appetite for engagement is growing, and I think we need to take cognizance of that. I may also tell you that for ITRs, again, the government has reached out to the private sector. I have picked up the phone and called the civil society. I have picked up the phone and called civil society saying, we are big Pranesh here. I've spent, I think, half an hour with him, with Sunil, with a couple of other people saying, we have been called. We are going to put our responses. It's going to be on the net. And this is what we've been asked to do. Now it's your call. You do what you have to. So to the extent we are doing that, I think when you think you're worse off, I think that part is moving slowly. We don't want to take all credit for this stuff, but hopefully it'll be there when you're called and we are not called. And so we hope that you will call us and let us know that this is going on. I think that's how this discussion will actually progress. It's probably an oversimplistic view, but that's the experience at least of the last few months.
Dr. Govind, you?
I think many questions were asked about the government, how the government is working and the various issues, but I would like to mention that the transparency and accountability thing which is raised, I think RTI is the one tool which the government has brought in, and where a lot of the government system now is working as a transparency within the governmental system and the accountability it is bringing out. So the government is slowly moving into a multi-stakeholder approach, because any policy, apparently it may not look like that, we have a large gathering of multi-stakeholderism, but we are taking inputs, the consultants, the inputs from the governments, other governments, the local governments, the private sector and industry, and the civil society. The way it may not be a conglomeration of this kind of thing which has happened today, but we have been consulting and even in the internet governance issues,
and the way the things were moving. And it's a learning lesson for the government also, because internet is an evolving system. And we are seeing that how best we can utilize the existing model and how the model is evolving itself with the multi-stakeholderism. So that kind of perspective the government has built into it. And even not only the internet governance, but even the other spheres of the government policy making. The government is engaging all sectors, private sector, especially because the industry has to run. Because even if the chip making someone talked about, we have to engage, the government has to support the fab in the country. Government has to support the multi-fiber system, the NFON coming up. National Knowledge Network is coming up. Schools connectivity is coming up. Devices coming up. Multilingual content has to be devised. So government is working in all these aspects as far as the internet ecosystem is concerned. And we are all for the cooperation and the multi-stakeholder consultancy and the consultation process which is there, and I hope this will continue forever. Thank you.
Okay, so Parminder wants to say something. So Parminder, could you also give up your wrap-up comment?
Yes.
Yeah, last comment? Yeah. Last comment.
Okay, yeah, I'll finish my comments in this round itself. I think the question started with Naveen, went to Mishi, and then partly to Pranesh about what happens beyond just the dialogue part. And that was what I was actually talking as a version, democracy version 3, where it is not ad hoc, but the processes of participation, participatory democracy becomes institutionalized. And how it gets done. And since this is a session about global internet governance, let me add one thing. A lot of people, Mr. Advani directly pointed to our association with the CIRP proposal, but
because you pointed out that we are becoming the tools of international politics. So avoid that kind of a communication, so we can also.
No, just in a positive sense.
No, please. No, that can't be a positive sense. No, I am more loyal than anybody in this country. So kindly check such remarks, please. This is my request.
Okay, gentlemen.
So I just said because of that. Okay.
Rani, in this case, I only positively said to your reference that you did refer to that association. I have no problem with the association. I just referred to that, and I said there is another association. When India made this proposal for the IGF improvements, we were also very much contributing to that. And this is important. India made a proposal for improvement to the IGF, which is a first multi-stakeholder UN body. It insisted that it is not enough for a policy dialogue to take place. It laid out a huge amount of processes of what should happen to the policy dialogue, how it should be structured, how it should be intersessionally working groups. You want to do it non-annual basis, month to month. They had full plan. Go and look at the IGF improvement proposal of India, which is called India Proposal. And then when multi-stakeholder dialogue finishes, the outcomes of it should be communicated to the policy bodies. The bodies should give a report of what did they do. All those people who are now saying they are supporters of multi-stakeholderism, northern governments, private sector and technical community did not agree to these proposals. They did not agree for the outputs of the IGFs to be taken out to the policy body. So this is a global scenario, and therefore things are much more nuanced than what we see on the surface of the black and white painting is the issue. But Pranesh is right that what happens on the domestic front is also important. And yes, we want to advocate the Brazilian model, and for which I have also written to Pranesh and some other people. I have a model out in place. I've talked to many other civil society people where we have a permanent institution based on a Brazilian model, but also the India's proposal for IGF improvement, which becomes a continuous India IGF regular event. And that proposal is also something which would like to share with other people. And Mr. Advani said about the Labler issue, and I still should answer that. Yes.
No, I also am saying that the proposal which you are talking about is with the government, the one you had proposed 3 years back, 4 years back. And I'm also saying that when we wanted to do IGF out here, you were the only one who opposed, and I accepted it. I also want to say that we didn't take a IGF further because I have no objective of my funding. I have nothing to do anything for my funding, please. So I'm saying all these things. If you want to respond now, please respond.
I continue to advocate what I advocate, that India IGF should be on the Brazilian model and on the model of the proposal that India gave for the improvement of the UN IGF. The proposal is there with me. You should go and look at it, and I have developed the points which should be what an India IGF should be. An India IGF should not be hosted in a private body. It should be hosted in a public body. It should be funded by a neutral system, and it should
have better representation from the marginalized sections. I was trying to answer the leveling question. Yes, I think the question of leveling has to do with whether it should be therefore regulated or not. Education is a huge leveler, and nobody will refuse education is a huge leveler. And India just now came out with the Right to Education bill, which is a huge amount of regulation on the education sector. For being a leveler and to regulate in the public interest are not necessarily opposites. Thank you.
Okay, Ramanjit. So I'll take from what Parminder said last. Regulation isn't necessarily something which is negative, but the point is what you do in regulation. So I'm just putting that in there. And that's why sometimes I just add some clarity. Regulation in the internet space can be effective. Some things aren't. So what I leave to all of you is just think about it. Do you think of existing regulatory things that you've heard about, whether it's on global internet governance or domestically, and see does it affect your ability to access an open internet? That's really the test. Look at it that way. Because the thing is, some regulation works, some regulation doesn't work. I speak about that as a policy analyst and as a lawyer. One thing people can tell you is regulation only really works for lawyers because they get paid regardless. They will look at bad regulations, they will write you good regulations, they'll write you whatever you want. The point is, speaking as citizens and more importantly as users of the internet, what right now, look at what's happening and just see, is it promoting what you really want? So if you want an ability to access a global internet that works really, really fast, what model do you propose that makes that work? If you believe that the existing model doesn't work fully well, what improvements do you want on it? And recognize what does happen. And the biggest challenge, frankly, is, and I again commend Ram for his work, engineers who actually make all of this work are loath to talk about it. Forget ICANN, some of the best work, my apologies, but forget ICANN. Look at the Internet Engineering Task Force. The engineers who create the things you use every day. As we discussed in this panel, there have been engineers who exchanged around 250 emails on requests for comments. They're changing the very way you're accessing content today. They're trying to get you to access content in different languages, and they're doing this completely on their own without half the time being paid for it. And they're doing it without any state telling them that they can do it. They're doing it because they want to make the system work. So firstly, recognize what really makes the current system work before you want to make radical proposal to change it. If you do want to really change it, go ahead. But then recognize what values are you promoting. But more importantly, at least domestically, the important takeaway I'll give to all of you is that perhaps in all of the stuff that India is doing right now, one process of it, of course, has been this conference. But wherever we're discussing this, especially our proposals on CIRP for the future, perhaps on other measures for the UN General Assembly, but also for the International Telecommunications Union, open it up further. For example, many of us who have been associated with FICCI have been very happy to have FICCI being consulted on this. But I think the one takeaway we all have is that further people should be consulted about this, including the actual engineers, again, from India who make these things work. Take that forward. And for other bodies involved in policy making in India on other subjects, whether it be the Standing Committee of IT in Parliament, ministries dealing with this, not just in the Ministry of Communications, but across the spectrum, law and justice, other bodies as well, be involved in these discussions. And by the way, this isn't a radical suggestion. Every other country right now that's doing serious work in this space, whether it be Brazil, whether it be the United States, whether it be every country in Europe is doing the same thing. For example, in Brazil, it's not just the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee which does work. It's also the Brazilian government recognizes that they will talk to the steering committee, but they will also talk to Brazilian academics. They will also speak to Brazilian engineers who make the internet work. So this entire spectrum is there. But perhaps our tangibles, our immediate outcomes could be that for the immediate next two global policy things we're taking part in, that perhaps we could have more open consultation and open discussion on this with the government of India, which ultimately represents all of us as citizens.
Ram? Thank you. And again, to FICCI and to ISOC, I really want to appreciate the forum and the opportunity to hear from all of you. There are a couple of points that I wanted to make. One, I began with talking about what I think is the foundation of a strong multi-stakeholder process, and that foundation is expandability, flexibility, and scalability. And in the interactions, it was clear that accountability and transparency are counterparts to that. You cannot have these without those. They must be there, right? So those are kind of the foundations of a strong and viable multi-stakeholder process. If you, and thank you for many of you who have provided compliments about ICANN. Inside of ICANN, we are used to a lot of the brickbats and some of the bouquets, so it's wonderful to hear that. But I wanted to not make this really about ICANN, because this is really about what some some of us call the I-STAR community. That is the, the ICANN, IETF, the Internet registries around the world, ISOC. All of these organizations have adopted a model that is about multi-stakeholderism, that allows for voices to be heard and allows for decisions to be guided by those voices. And I think that model is something to be studied and to be improved upon, because it is definitely not perfect. It is something we are learning how to do. But it's a terrific way to get started. So I just wanted to share that compliments with the I-STAR community. There was one thought I would like to leave you with. I've heard several of you talk about Internet governance, talk about multi-stakeholderism, and then there seems to be this tendency to think that there are some areas that we should exclude. Cybersecurity is one, right? It's important, it affects national security, there is a sovereign interest involved in it, and these are very reasonable points of view to make the argument that cybersecurity has to be, carved out. Think about this. Attempting to push boundaries on a borderless system can be a very difficult task. So perhaps what we should think about when we look at cybersecurity and what we want to do there, even determining accountability. Earlier the minister said this is not a governance problem in cybersecurity, it is an accountability problem. But even determining accountability when it comes to cybersecurity is hard. It's very tough. ICANN works with many organizations when it comes to cybersecurity or denial of service attacks and things like that. It's very hard to find out where the attacks originate, much less where they terminate. And all the access to all the networks and all the logs doesn't necessarily get you the answer, right? So perhaps instead of, in the cybersecurity area, instead of looking at that and saying, let's carve it off, let's acknowledge that there is a sovereign interest. Of course there's a sovereign interest, but the solution is not by blocking it off and carving it out. A coordination, perhaps, is the first step in resolution of this issue. I just want to take a brief moment to give you an example, and I'll leave you with that example. Several years ago, there was a computer security problem called Conficker, C-O-N-F-I-C-K-E-R. This is a worm, and this worm was afflicting computers all around the world. It was unique in two respects. Number one, the foundation of the worm, the Conficker worm, the foundation of it was encrypted, and the encryption was excellent. It was really a very well done worm, and the best security researchers around the world had a very hard time breaking open how the worm actually worked. As far as I know, it's still not been done. But there was a second part to that worm that was really malicious. What it did, unlike most of the worms, what this one did was a computer that received the worm and that had that particular worm sitting on it, the computer looked every day to a list of domain names and websites, and it looked that up, and that list changed every day. This is a cybersecurity threat. Coordination was the answer to solve that problem. Conficker is more or less contained to a good extent, but coordination helped rather than blocking it off. Thank you.
Brad?
I'm just going to wrap up by saying two or three things, which is I think it would help us to move into genuine multi-stakeholderism if we can be slightly more specific. So if there are policy gaps, as Parminder says, then let's identify the policy gaps and let's find the real place where they can be resolved, rather than worry about, mention the problem and then find situations where everybody may not come together on the same point of view. If Mishi says the difficulty is that we are not even on the table, then you have to speak about that, and then we'll have to find a way about this. I'm not saying this conference is perfect. There was indications given that public finance handled this perfect. I do not agree with the fact that publicly funded conference would be better. That's the point of view that you have. National IGFs across the world are being funded by the private sector and with participation, equal open access and participation. If there's an issue about marginalized sections not being represented, that was the MAG's job. And there were meetings held and people should have stated that this person should also be called. Let's have these sessions also. So I think it will help if we don't stand behind general comments. I think we really need to be specific now because that's how we'll build trust amongst each other. And my request is let's do that on a going forward because that's how this process will improve. The last piece I just want to make about multi-stakeholderism and agendas and all that stuff that's going on. Here is the deal on agendas and multi-stakeholder. Around the world, there are going to be 6 billion users of internet. I don't think everybody can participate in every decision that's being made. I don't think in India we can do that successfully. I certainly don't claim to do that. I don't believe even it's the government's claim that they can do it. It's not even the claim that they believe that only publicly funded IGF is the best way to do it. They've never said it. So I don't want to go there. But here is what my request is for you to consider. Multi-stakeholderism requires to be as participative as possible. But I think the decisions that we make from those meetings, conferences, should have a buy-in of everyone. I think let's make a difference between being participative and have a buy-in. So you may not be in every meeting, but do we buy into what's going on? You know, everybody may not be in UNCIR, but they buy into UNC. Everybody may not be in the ITU, ITRs, but do they buy into what they come? I think that is the test in this huge, sea of issues that can we all buy into this by and large and move the agenda forward. I would really leave it at that rather than, trying to build an agreement on every single process or having everybody in every meeting. I can't see that happening. So I would think let's work with buy-ins.
Dr. Govin?
Thank you, Rajneesh. A couple of points. The government is taking the steps towards the interministerial groups because within the government there are various, stakeholders, like even the ITR, DOT and DIT both are working. Then, MEA is there. Then the CERT is there, security, MHA is there. So we are making a interministerial group to tackle the issues of internet governance. And on the larger side is the committee of secretaries, which we are working a bigger proposal to see that, how each transaction, the Ministry of Finance, the MHA, the Defense, and, DOT, all the major stakeholders or major relevant ministries, how we can bring them together and how we can tell them what are the issues, because even today, defining an issue itself is a challenge in internet governance. If you take the particular piece, internet protocol, or you take the IPR, intellectual property, what is good for the country, what is not good for the country, who will decide? Whether MHRD will decide, or the Internet Society will decide, or who within the government or outside the government. So after this kind of generic internet governance kind of conference, I would look forward to a kind of a way forward in the sense that on the specifics of any issue, we have to bring out a good white paper and then delve upon it, how to move about even in the cybersecurity and the intellectual property or the privacy or the many other issues which we do not know. As Mr. Kapil Sibal said, that, even if it is not broken, it is not to be fixed, but we do not know where the things are going to be broken in the future, in the coming decade, We have to see the future, not the present. Keeping the internet expanding in a big way. So we have to see how, not just, like this Tunis phase where everybody talked about multi-stakeholder, but today we are not very clear what is internet governance and what is multi-stakeholderism. How much percentage of these people have to be involved, where they have involved, what is each one of them's involvement, role, and who is to play what role and what way move forward, and the technical community or the the industry or the civil society, because it's a very delicate issue, because it's not a question of one stakeholder saying I am not involved, other stakeholder saying I am totally involved. It is a question of how we bring transparency, as someone talked about accountability, and at the same time move forward as the internet is evolving. The nature of internet is such that today we cannot have a one stakeholder alone deciding about all the issues and all the policies and all the, the governance issues. We have to move forward. There is no way out other than, even in the government, even anything, cybersecurity or any other aspect, today government takes into account the help of the private sector. Anything you take, the private sector is there, industry is there, civil society voices are there. So government has to take into account all these factors, and this taking into account, the nature of internet is such. Government cannot do anything without the cooperation and coordination and the well-being of the people at the stake. And the other thing is we need to have because internet ecosystem in India is presently not working the way the other countries have moved. The academia, the industry has not to just talk about the internet governance issues, but we have to bring how to solve those issues, how to have more participation in the various global forums where this ITF forum or the ICANN forum, active involvement of the policy makers and the active involvement of the industry. I hardly see very few industries participating in these forums. Of course, the challenge of the TADA is there, but how to see that more and more participation, because unless you see the thing, what is happening in these, GTLDs, new generic top-level domains, CCTLDs, SS, Security Stability Accountability Committee, all these things are, unless you go there, you will not understand the perspective, because .beauty, I will give you one example, .beauty is coming up, L'Oreal has proposed that domain name. But is it exclusively for the L'Oreal, or it is other parlors or products can be using it? That's a challenge. Like .com was used for everyone, but if .beauty is allowed only by the L'Oreal, then what will happen to the other, such product makers and other parlors? Similarly, .book, Amazon has taken that .book. So is it exclusively for Amazon, or it is for other book companies or all over the world? So these are the very delicate issues. Similarly, Hyderabad. Hyderabad is there in 2-3 places all over the world. Who has to take GOTLDs? So unless we go each and every aspect of the internet ecosystem and the specifics of the issue, we will be just wandering here and there and talking about internet governance, and that's it. But we have to see involvement of everybody, understand the issue, threadbare. That's why the whole homework is required to be done in each and every aspect of the internet governance, each and every issues, and take forward. That's the thing. Thank you.
There's dinner at stake now, so I think we should run.
Ambassador? I think nobody has taken that.
I'll be very brief. I've had the great honor and privilege of going to every IGF, the global IGF, since they were created. I've gone to many of the national IGFs and others. I've never been to one more lively, more innovative, more exciting, and the fact that we're an hour over our limit here is a testament to, I think, the organizers having done an extraordinary job. I was struck by this colloquy about whether or not there should be greater participation. I'm amazed by how much participation there is at 8 o'clock at night among so many diverse interests, bringing forward very important, very interesting points on a global basis. This is really quite an extraordinary, and I really want to thank again all of the organizers and you all for having put together such a great first day, and tomorrow I'm sure will be even better. Yeah. So thank you.
I just want to say one thing before you go on, that this credit is, FICCI is being said again and again. It's really not. We've done the physical handling of this conference. It's been the Ministry of Communications. They've had 2 officers, or senior level officers, on the MAG from day one. We've had civil society plan sessions, give us speakers that we didn't have, give us women speakers, especially because we want gender balance. So, we are not the only one who deserve the credit, I can tell you that.
Professor? Yeah, I just thought, I think what all has to be said has been already said in different ways. So I thought I'll leave 5 imperatives for us to think in future, if you have an immediate one on a daily basis or hourly basis or yearly basis. The question simply finally boils down, if you look at the cracks of what is happening last 1 year, 2 years in terms of internet process about various other issues. One is to legislate or not to legislate. This is the Hamlet's question which government is going to face, And this is where, when you say that they want to co-op, they want to really talk more, and then, really, get that, all that is the big challenge. The second imperative, which one of my colleagues from National Law University was talking about, law was comfortable before internet because it was operating in a paradigm of time and space. So you be a Roman in Rome, fine, and then it's a time, everything is fine. But when time and space is squeezed in internet, and then I find what is acceptable, not acceptable somewhere else, all these issues will be another choice for to legislate or not to legislate. Leave alone about, you talk about freedom of expression. So we had freedom of expression in YouTube on something, what is the definition of freedom of expression in certain standards, and then since it's a global phenomena, it's different. The third imperative, nation states are getting more and more. 50 states around during World War II, we got 200 plus. So we're going to talk about exclusivity, they're talking about their own sovereignty, they're going to really talk about a lot of multiplicity happening. So internet has made us a village, but the real world, more nation states are waiting to come out, right? And the fourth imperative, as I said, the cultural prism of values. So how do you really look at values? And so in one side, earlier, a book need not travel to other place, I can ban it. And it was much easy, so you be comfortable with your value system, I be comfortable. When in internet, this is going to be a huge challenge. Not just, it's even civil society has to answer these questions. How far they have to give a white paper to the government. If the government cannot act, then it's a problem. If it acts, it's another problem. So, it's, the best thing is not to be part of government, right? So the final imperative, as I said, there may be three ways we can, or more, three at least. Is there a way of harmonization? I think if we have harmonized, we don't need so many nation states in the first place, right? Globalization, that's a very bad word, right? It depends upon whether I tell or you tell the model. So the third part is amelioration. That is what is going to happen, a little bit of tinkering. So my point is that as taking Naresh, a leveler, internet is a leveler. Let the aspiration, hopes of this also be a leveler at a point. Thank you.
So, we've been going on for nearly 2.5 hours. So, if I start to summarize this, I think we'll even miss dessert. Forget about that dinner. So, I won't do that. I will leave you with just a couple of thoughts, and these are personal thoughts, as in the spirit of everyone talking about personal capacities and personal comments. One thing that's very obvious is that the internet has given all of us a voice to do things, to voice our concerns, and to also identify issues and try and work around them. So that's where the internet becomes a leveler, Naresh, to my response to your question. Also, in line with what the internet and how it's evolved, how it's developed, we refer to the internet model, for example, in our community. It allows everyone a voice. Yes, it's sometimes not easy to go and have that voice. There are various hindrances to that. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's geography, sometimes it's a time zone problem, whatever it is. But the fact is that through the internet and the processes around it, everyone does have a voice in some way or form. It may not be your direct voice, but it can be someone who can represent your voice. Again, I go back to Naresh and your organization. You represent that many people. FICCI represents industry. ISOC Chennai represents internet users in Chennai, etc., etc. So the internet gives us that opportunity to do that. In terms of what multi-stakeholderism is and where it's headed, and one of the audience members said earlier that it's an evolutionary process, and I completely agree. It's never going to be right from day one. It's something we have to tinker with. We tweak, we tinker again, we tweak again. We massage it a little bit, coax it, tap it, pat it, whatever we have to do. Give it a kiss if we have to, and then make it a whole lot better. And that's what it's going to be. It may take us a couple of years to do that. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are getting there. We see ICANN changing. We see other processes changing. We see ITU changing. So, I think the future is promising, and we all need to contribute to the future. So with that, thank you very much for joining this session. I appreciate staying all through. Thank you to the speakers.
For almost 3 hours.
I believe we have some